الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان. والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان. والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان. وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان. والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام. والحب ذو العصف والريحان. والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار. وخلق الجان من مارج من نار. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العلي العظيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. I hope everyone is doing well, inshallah. And I hope that this month of Ramadan has been full of blessings and full of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of us. And I also hope that we have been able to take advantage of this special month. The month of Ramadan comes and goes. For many of us, it has come and gone maybe 20, 30 years in our lives. But hopefully we can make sure that this Ramadan will be different and that we will benefit from this month and take advantage of this month, inshallah. So the topic that I wanted to discuss for today, with my thanks to the brothers and sisters for having me, the topic that I wanted to discuss for today was the topic of fulfilling the purpose of our creation. The reason why I chose this topic is because it is very crucial, it is very fundamental and central to the way that you look at religion and essentially your whole life. And what I've noticed and what I've essentially recognized is that in the Muslim community, the average person does not have a very good grasp on this topic. And it's something that they really struggle with. If you were to go around and ask the average Muslim or the average Shia even, as to what is the purpose of their creation and how they are supposed to fulfill it, you would see that they would struggle with that. They would struggle with answering that question, even though it seems to be a very fundamental question. It seems to be a question that every single human being would have at any point in their life. Still, you'll find a lot of people who don't have the answer to that question. That's on one hand. On the other hand, understanding the answer to that question and having it click for you and really being able to digest what the purpose of our creation was will really, really help us when it comes to actually acting upon the teachings of Islam. A person who doesn't have a full grasp of this topic will always struggle. They will always have obstacles on their path when they want to act upon Islam. But someone who is able to understand this topic properly, then when Islam asks them to do things, including things that sometimes might be a little difficult, things that might be a little, you'll have to struggle to be able to carry out, you find that this person will be able to go along with it and he will be able to carry it out because he understands what the final goal and the final purpose is behind everything that he is doing. So that's why I want to choose this topic, and inshallah we will also touch on how we can really grow from a spiritual perspective. What does it mean to grow from a spiritual perspective? And also the number one trick that Shaitan has up his sleeve for us during these days and nights, these holy days and nights of Ramadan. And of course, we know he's tied up right now. But once he's released after the month of Ramadan is over, what is that one trick that Shaitan has up his sleeve that so many people fall for, and that hopefully we can try to keep our distance from? So I'll start the discussion. The discussion mainly is going to have two main parts. The first is, what is the purpose of our creation? And number two will be, how do you go about fulfilling that purpose? As it relates to what is the purpose of our creation, this is a question that, like I said, if you go to the average Muslim or the average Shia, the average kid who's growing up in a Muslim or Shia community, and you were to ask them with regards to the answer to this question, a lot of times what you will find is they will not have a very good grasp on the answer to this question. And usually you will get three different responses from them that I've categorized here. Usually you will get these three different answers for an answer to this question. And none of them really seem to satisfy the person who is asking this question. None of them seem to really be answering the question fully. Okay, so when I go through them, I'll explain a little bit more what that means. Before I do that, I want to just mention that what we're trying to answer here, the question that we're trying to answer here is, what is the final purpose? What is the final goal of our creation? You might have short-term goals in everything that you do, and then sometimes beyond a short-term goal, you will have a long-term goal that comes after that. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at that long-term goal, right? You have shorter goals at times as well. So for example, when you get in the car, right, or you grab your keys to get into your car, when you grab your keys, your immediate goal is to get in your car and turn on your car, right? But the reason why you're grabbing your keys in terms of the long-term goal might be, for example, to go out and get food, might be to go out and meet a group of friends, for example, which obviously we can't do so much nowadays with everything that has been going on, with this virus and everything. So there's short-term goals and then there's long-term goals, right? And there's ultimate goals. The question we're trying to answer is, what is the ultimate goal of our creation? What is the ultimate purpose of our creation? That's what we're trying to get at here, okay? And I say this because when I go through these answers, you will find that these answers are very common answers. They're answers that you will hear very often from a Muslim, but they're not really answering the fundamental question that we have. Okay, so if you categorize the answers you'll get, the first answer that people will give to you, if you were to ask them, what is the purpose of our creation? Why were we created? They'll tell you, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to test us, right? He wanted to put us through some tests. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us, okay? There's a reason why someone would think that that is the ultimate goal and the ultimate purpose of their creation, partially because it's mentioned in verses of the Quran that we have created you لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. We have created you to see which of you is going to be the best. So there is essentially, the Quran alludes to this point, that you were created because you would be tested. Okay, that makes sense. On the other hand, what you also find is that every human being that you see around you goes through difficulties. They go through trials and tribulations. And therefore, that's another point in your mind that would make this answer seem like the proper answer. However, in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating us to test us can never be the final purpose of our creation, right? That's not the correct answer to this question. We're not looking at short-term goals. We're looking at long-term goals. What's the final purpose? A test can never be the final test of any action that you do. Doesn't matter what it is you're doing. It can never be the final goal. Why? Because a test is always done for something else, right? You've run a test to then do something with the results of that test. That's why we call it a test, if you think about it, right? So if we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to test us, that doesn't bear much of an answer, really, because the final goal can never be a test. This is why if you went to maybe those who are tuning in from within North America, or in America in particular, where we don't have free healthcare, can relate to this a little bit more. This is why if you go to the hospital and they say, we're just going to run some tests, right? If you feel like those tests are not necessary, if you feel like they're not going to do anything in particular with the results of those tests, you will feel infuriated because you have to pay for those tests and you feel like there's no purpose behind them, right? This goes to show that a test, the value it carries is only through the results that it's going to deliver to you. If you're not gonna take the results and do something with the results, then the test doesn't hold any value for you, which is why you don't want to pay for them, right? And of course, some places of the world they have free healthcare, and so that example wouldn't hold true for them, right? But any test, you walk into a classroom, the teacher says we're going to have a test today. Is it going to show up on our grade? Is it going to be a measure of how much we know? No, we're just going to run a test. It doesn't hold much value for you, right? So a test is always done for something else. So that's not the answer to our question. It's not the fundamental purpose for our creation. So I'm going to move on from that. And all three of these answers that I'm going to go through, the first, which the test, these are all answers that I call textbook answers, because a lot of times what we do as Muslims is that we don't really understand what is being said fully, but because there's a textbook answer and there's an answer that's out there, we'll just throw that answer out there, right? And sometimes our youth have this as well, where we will take a quote, for example, a saying of someone else. We will take an answer to a question and we'll just throw it out there. And we don't know exactly what it means necessarily, but because our knowledge is not very deep, we will just go with that basic answer. And the problem with that is a lot of times it won't answer the question that we have, and that question will just lurk in the back of our mind for years and years. Okay, so the first question for the first answer was to test us. We said that that can be the ultimate answer to our question. Moving on, the second answer that you will get, and this one is probably the one that you probably get the most, is this: Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us so that we would worship him. Okay, now, why would someone assume that this is the correct answer to our question? Well, mainly because the Quran itself speaks of this. The Quran says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We did not create the human being or the jinn except for the fact that they would worship us. So the Quran is talking about this, right? And outside of that verse in particular, you find a whole bunch of other verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of the importance of the human being worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So this seems to be the right answer to our question. But like I mentioned at the very beginning, the question was, what is the ultimate purpose of our creation? Not the intermediate goals, not the short-term goals, not the goal where out of that goal you're going to get something even bigger and even greater, not that goal. So when you look at worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it seems as though this is not even the final goal. In other words, it's necessary, but there's going to be something that's going to come out of us worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will come as a result of you worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it seems as though that is the final purpose and the final goal, not necessarily the worship itself, although the worship has to happen, but it seems as though this is also a gateway into something even greater. Why do we say that? Well, because if it was just the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as it relates to him, he already has creatures that are worshiping him day and night. He already has angels, some of which we don't even know their, their form of creation. We don't even know how many wings they have, as the khutbah of Amir al-Mu'mineen says in Nahj al-Balagha. Some of them, as he says, their feet are on earth, their wings are in the heaven, or the heads are in the heavens, right? And thousands and thousands or millions, or we don't really know the numbers of angels that might be out there. Okay, if these angels are out there and they're worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala day and night, as the verses of the Quran say, then what value does my worship hold if the final purpose of my creation was just to worship God and there was nothing else that was going to come out of this worshiping of him, right? So we're not saying it's not necessary, it's absolutely necessary, but is it the final purpose? It doesn't seem to be that final purpose of the worship, of the creation of ours. And this is important to remember, especially when we explain these concepts to younger children, right? Because growing up, and many of you have experienced this growing up in Sunday school, whenever you ask, well, why did God create us? They would tell you that God created you so that you would worship him. And the kind of feeling you would walk away with is that, well, if that's the only reason why he created us, that kind of sounds like a king, right? Who has nothing better to do than just wanting people to worship him, right? And unfortunately, sometimes people who leave the religion of Islam, and even some of our youth, they walk away from Islam with that mentality and with that understanding. And part of it is because we never get to actually discussing fundamental questions like this. So that doesn't seem to be the final goal either, although it's important and critical, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Moving on from that, the third answer that you would get, and this again is a little bit of a textbook answer that you will get, is that people will say, well, God created us to reach perfection. This kamal, they throw out this term, say, God created us to reach perfection. Okay, is that correct? Yes, that is the correct answer. But what does it mean though, right? Because when you say we were created to reach perfection, that's a very abstract concept that we're talking about. So we have to delve into that a little bit better to understand what exactly that means on a practical level, so that we can connect with that answer a little bit more, right? Like I said, a lot of times we'll throw out these answers, we don't even know what they mean. but just because we've heard them here or there growing up, we'll say them. This is another one of those textbook answers, which is correct, right? But we need to understand what it means exactly. So on a practical level, going from the abstract to the practical level now, on a practical level, what it means when we say we are created to reach perfection is this, that as a human being, we have a number of attributes surrounding us. And in fact, that's what makes us who we are. What makes us who we are the different attributes that we have, right? Each person might have a number of different attributes, maybe 100, 200 different types of attributes. It might be generosity, it might be patience, it might be the anger they have, it might be, the modesty that they have. It could be a whole host of attributes that they have. Based on those attributes, that's what defines what type of person they would be, essentially, okay? When we say we want to reach perfection on a practical level, what that means is that you take each and every one of these attributes and you push them to the furthest extent that you can. You grow them to the furthest extent that you can. And if you're able to do that, then it comes to a point where you are coming closer to perfection. And if you do that for all of your attributes, then as a whole and as a human being, you will then come closer to this concept that we refer to as perfection. So when we say we were created to, reach perfection, what that practically means is that we were created to take each and every attribute of our existence and to grow it. And the more you grow it, the closer you will come to this abstract concept that we call perfection. Okay. So that's how it is supposed to happen on a practical level. Now, what are we going to get out of this? Once someone does this and they perfect their character, they perfect their attributes as much as they can, as to the extent that they can, when they leave this world, they will start to see the beauty, they will start to see the magnificence of their attributes. Okay. And what we talk about and we refer to as heaven essentially is a byproduct and a result of a person essentially seeing what type of person he has become, seeing what type of characteristics he has built. Those same attributes, those are the same things that creates and essentially defines someone's heaven. Heaven doesn't come from thin air, right? Heaven comes basically with the attributes that you have created inside of yourself. The only thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do on the day of judgment is that He will show you the reality of these attributes that you carry. These attributes of ours, they have physical, aspects to them. So for example, modesty, I'll give you this example, it has a physical existence and a physical aspect of it. What is the physical aspect of it? The physical aspect of it is that, for example, you wear a type of clothing, a specific type of clothing, for example, or in the way you conduct yourself with the opposite, you in a specific manner. This is the physical aspect of modesty, or I should say the worldly aspect of it, the materialistic aspect of it. When we go to the next world, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does is that this modesty that you have built within your character, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then takes this and essentially shows you the beauty that you have created within yourself, right? And that's why we have hadith, for example, a person who was patient in this world, his patience will take on a physical form in the next world, right? Now, when I say a physical form, we're talking more about like a barzakhi type of existence, but those are details that we don't want to get into right now. Essentially, it will take on a form where he can see his patience as a real being. And the reality is these attributes of ours are real beings, right? And when this patience shows up for him on the day of judgment, it is so beautiful, then he wouldn't want anything but to have this patience around him. Same thing will apply to all of our attributes. That's essentially what heaven is. Heaven comes from our attributes directly. It is an unveiling of the reality of the attributes that we have built in this world, okay? On the other hand, hellfire is the same thing when it comes to negative attributes. Hellfire means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will unveil to us the negative reality, the ugliness of these negative attributes that, God forbid, we have built into ourselves. That's where hellfire comes from, okay? So essentially, when we say we want to reach perfection, what that means is you build each of these attributes of yours, and then you move on to the next world. When you move on to the next world, then you will indulge in this unbelievable pleasure that you had not indulged in this world. And that pleasure comes from you having reached this perfection, from you having built each and every one of these attributes of yours to the fullest extent. And that's why the more you grow them, the more pleasure there will be for you in heaven. This is the final purpose of our creation. This is why we were created fundamentally, okay? So the reason why I'm saying this is, like I said, a lot of times we'll mention other things as the final purpose of creation. People thinking that, well, if God created me for this purpose, it doesn't seem like a very lofty purpose. God created me just so I would worship him, just so I would bow down to him 5 times a day. Doesn't seem like a very lofty, valuable purpose, right? And that's because we are only seeing part of the picture. That is part of the picture, but it's not the full picture. The full picture is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests you, then you will choose good over evil, which means you will worship him. And when you worship him, you reach a perfection, which means you grow your attributes. And when you do that, then you will go into the next world and you will indulge in the pleasure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for you because of your attributes. That's a full picture of the purpose of our creation. Now, of course, this is a much, much longer discussion, and I'm summarizing it because I want to move on more so to the part of the discussion that has to do with how you fulfill this purpose, right? How do you actually go about building these attributes, right? That's the part that we want to get to, inshallah. But in order to get to that, first we have to understand where we're headed, and this is where we're headed. So when we say what's the final purpose of our creation, if I wanted to put it in one line, so the final purpose of our creation is to experience the greatest pleasures of that ever existed. But you can't do that unless you go through the previous steps, which is worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which can only be done if you are in a place where you are tested with good and with bad. So all of these answers tie in with one another, but it's only one of them that is the final answer that we were looking for. Okay, now, if someone wants to really reach this perfection, they want to fulfill this purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating them, how do they go about it? This is the main point that I wanted to, get across for today. How do you go about fulfilling this purpose? Because there's actually different ways of doing it. We said you want to reach that perfection, you have to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, makes sense. Now, I want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are different ways of doing it. And in this month of Ramadan, and every time the month of Ramadan comes up, in fact, every time Muharram comes up, you will see the differences between these two approaches that I'm about to explain. Okay. So if I want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, usually we would assume that the way to go about it is just to do a bunch of good deeds. Okay. That's one way to do it. But then you will find people will fall under two main categories. Okay. The first category of people who want to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through their acts of worship are people who essentially are playing math with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're playing a game of math with him. Okay, and I'll explain what that means. And then you have people on the other hand who know they're not playing math with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're actually trying to build a connection and a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first group is the type of group who will do a bunch of good deeds, okay? And when they do those bunch of good deeds, then they will mix with those good deeds of theirs some bad deeds. And because of that, those good deeds that they had kind of loses its spiritual effect on them. But because they are playing a game of math with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will do math in their mind. And in their mind, they're still progressing towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So in this person's mind, he will be thinking, I did 2 good deeds, right? So that's 2 times 10, because in his mind, every good deed that he does is times 10. That's 2 times 10 equals 20. And I did 2 bad deeds. So that's 20 minus 2. So I'll still have a profit of 18 plus. That's what he's thinking, right? And so technically, I'm going to end up in heaven because I have more good deeds than bad deeds. That's one approach that people take when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. The other approach is, no, I'm trying to build a relationship with him. Therefore, I'm going to strive towards a lifestyle where I don't even end up doing haram. Or if I do haram, over time, I will remove that haram habit from my life. The second approach is the approach that we need to be after. The first approach, although this person will most probably will not end up in hellfire, he will most probably will end up in heaven, essentially. But this person, his faith and his iman will never truly grow. What does that mean? That means he's living a life where he starts to do some good deeds naturally, right? And his iman starts to increase. And as it increases and increases, then he commits a sin. When he commits a sin, of course, his faith takes a hit. It goes down. Then he does a tawbah again. Then he does a bunch of good deeds again. His faith starts to grow again. Before his faith can start growing fully again, he commits another bad deed, commits another sin. Then again, it comes down. He does tawbah again, and it goes back up. And you will find that this person is just going through this cycle of his faith growing, him ruining his faith with a sin, and then growing that faith again and ruining it again. And essentially, this person most probably will never end up in hellfire. I mean, most probably he'll end up in heaven. But does he actually build this thing we call spirituality? Does he actually build this thing we call iman? Does he actually build this thing we call faith? The answer is absolutely not. This person, he's never truly growing. And if you took the trajectory of his faith over the span of 50, 60 years, and you looked at it, this person would end up at the same point that he was at 30 years ago. Why? Because he's been going up, but every time his faith and his iman really wants to grow, he commits the same sin again and the same sin again. And there's no shame in that, brothers and sisters, as long as someone is trying to eradicate that habit from their life, right? So if you're doing shame in that, of course, we all make mistakes. And so you do tawbah and you try to remove it. But some people, they won't do that. Some people, they will just continue with their life. They'll do good and they'll do bad and they'll just mix it up together. But in reality, this person is never coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. The other person, however, he might be doing a lot less good deeds. He might not be doing as much amal. He might not be doing as much good deeds in Muharram, for example. He might not be going crazy on the night of Qadr with doing every single amal that's out there, right? Which, unfortunately, you do see sometimes brothers and sisters really, going, a little overboard in terms of. Now, this person, if you look at him after 30, 40, 50, 60 years, even though his growth might be slow, but it's slow and it's steady though. And after 50, 60 years, if he started down here where he had like 5 haram habits in his life, after 60 years, he's up here and he's continuing to grow every single second because he's not essentially jeopardizing his faith every second with a haram habit that he has in his life. Okay. So if someone wants to truly build spirituality, come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, build his faith, all these things we talk about can only be done and only through one way. And that is building a life where you actually don't do haram, not a life where you do haram and then you repent. That is still good for someone who's starting out, right? But that's where you start out. The next level is where you reach a point where you don't essentially kill your faith every 2 days because you commit a sin and you mix up that sin with a bunch of good deeds that you have, right? Now, this is, before I go through this hadith that I want to share with you, it's a very beautiful hadith from the 6th Imam that really, really demonstrates how we play this game of math with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before I go through that, this is really the main point that a lot of people miss in Ramadan. When you go through Ramadan, right, you build this sense of spirituality. The key point that this is supposed to translate into is whether I can take this and I can make changes in my life. Spirituality is based on habits and it's based on the actions that we do. It is not based on feelings, brothers and sisters. You don't build spirituality because you feel spiritual. It's not like that. You build spirituality because you do good deeds and you stay away from haram deeds. That's how you build spirituality. And so therefore, if I have this spiritual feeling because I just went through the nights of Qadr, but then that doesn't translate into action for me and I just come back to my life and my life still, I do good deeds and I still mix it with some haram deeds and still some good deeds and some still mixing with haram deeds. If I come back to that lifestyle, Am I truly benefiting from the month of Ramadan fully? No, not even close to it. And that's how 90% of people will benefit from the month of Ramadan. They'll just go through Ramadan as something that gives them a spiritual feeling. Now, by the way, this is exactly what Shaitan loves for us to have. Shaitan loves the idea that you and I will go through the month of Ramadan, right? And we will walk away with this feeling like we are spiritual, but at the same time, we won't really make any real life changes. Shaitan loves that. That's the thing that makes the shaitan the happiest, essentially, because he feels like he's getting away with it. He feels like, on one hand, you have this spiritual feeling, but in reality, you didn't change anything, right? He feels like he's really, really covered and hidden, and essentially, he feels like he can really manipulate you now, because you, on one hand, like I said, you feel spiritual. You say, I went through the nights of Qadr, I went through the month of Ramadan, but on the other hand, in reality, you didn't change anything, and I didn't change anything in our day-to-day lives. So that little bit of spirituality that we built in the month of Ramadan, because we don't create any changes in our life, because we don't remove those haram habits that we have in our life, essentially what happens is it's a very short-lived spirituality. And a couple of weeks after Ramadan, it's all gone, right? Because then I go and commit these haram deeds, and essentially I go back to a lifestyle where my faith keeps going up and down with this cycle. And after 50 years, my Ramadan is the same Ramadan it was, 50 years ago. So the point is, the way you go about building spirituality is a life where slowly you build things in such a way where you commit less haram deeds as you move on, until you reach a life, it's not easy, easier said than done, where you might be committing one haram deed every 6 months. If you think that's easy, think again. It's not easy. If you want to do the basics of your religion consistently, not mess up and do tawbah, that's good. That's doing tawbah is wonderful, and that's great, of course. But beyond that, the next step is to reach a point where you don't commit that sin, right? Where your faith doesn't take that hit for you then to do tawbah and then rebuild it again. If you're able to do that, then this is the way you can really, really benefit from the month of Ramadan. And surely the spirituality of a person will skyrocket in this manner. Instead of taking small steps every now and then towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this person will be taking strides towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he's able to get rid of these sins that take away from the spirituality that he is building with his good deeds. Okay. Having said that, I want to share this hadith with you because it really demonstrates very well this mentality. And a lot of people have this mentality in our communities, unfortunately, that their main goal is, how do I play math with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And how do I create a situation where essentially the good deeds that I have are more than my bad deeds. And so because of that, at the end of the day, I won't go to hellfire, for example, right? This game of math. Now, okay, I think I had some issue, 1 second. Now, this hadith is from the sixth Imam, salawatullahi alayhi. And the sixth Imam, he says that I was in the city of Medina. And he says that I heard of a person in the city of Medina that everyone is continuously praising, and everyone is saying he's such a great person and he does so many good deeds. And there was this huge following that he had. So he says, this is the sixth Imam saying this, he says, I followed him one day and I went into the bazaar, and I saw that the moment this person entered into the bazaar, because so many people spoke so highly of him, they all gathered around him and they were all essentially listening to see what he has to say. And so he had this huge following. And the Imam says that when I saw this, I stood a little bit further away, just waiting to see what he would do. I was waiting for him to finish up with his talk with people. So he says he was done with his talk with the people, and he started to walk away from this crowd, and people started to disperse, and people started, the crowd, each of them continued with their own affairs and their own issues that they were going to take care of in the bazaar that day. The Imam says, I followed him. and I wanted to see where he was going to go. So the Imam says he continued to walk through this bazaar. Pay attention, because it's a very beautiful hadith from the Imam. Really puts things into perspective. It says, I watched him walk through the bazaar. And as he was walking through the bazaar, he came across a person who was selling pomegranates, right? He was selling roman, He was selling pomegranates. And without this person paying attention, as this person was calling out and telling people to come and buy pomegranates from him, without him paying attention, he stole 2 of these pomegranates. And he put these pomegranates in his pocket. And he continued on his path. And as he continued on his path, then he came across a person who was selling bread. He was selling loaves of bread. And as he was trying to attract customers to himself, this person who was selling the bread, this individual, without him paying attention, took 2 loaves of his bread and put it in his pocket as well. So now, essentially, he has stolen from 2 people so far, right? He's stolen 2 pomegranates and he's stolen 2 loaves of bread as well. Then the Imam says, I continued to follow him to see what it is that he was going to do with these, because I was very surprised. And the Imam says that when I saw this, I didn't automatically assume that he was stealing. I thought to myself, maybe they have some sort of an arrangement. Maybe he has some sort of an arrangement with the people who are selling this pomegranate, or the person who is selling the bread. Maybe it's some sort of arrangement that they've had from before, right? Maybe they're aware that he's taking these things. So I didn't assume anything. This is in the hadith of the Imam, and that's another lesson for us, really. So the Imam says, nonetheless, I continued to follow him and just see what he would do. Then the Imam says he came across a poor person in the bazaar, and he took out these 2 pomegranates and he handed these 2 pomegranates to the poor person. Right? Very interesting. And then this person who got these pomegranates, obviously, more than happy, say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on you for helping those who are needy. And then the Imam says, I continued, he followed on, he continued on. He moved on to a second person who was very poor, and he took out the 2 loaves of bread, and he gave those 2 loaves of bread to that second person who was poor and was needy. And the Imam says, I again was very surprised at what I was seeing. Is this person stealing? And then after stealing, he comes back and he gives this stuff as charity. It doesn't make sense. So the Imam says, I continued to follow him until he went into the outskirts of the city, and I confronted him. I approached him face to face, and I asked him, I said, I have been watching you today, and the actions that you have done, they are very perplexing. Like, I don't understand. They're very confusing. People say all these good things about you. You steal, and then you go and give, or at least you don't steal, but you take from others' wealth and you give it as charity. Is this correct, what I'm understanding from what you have done today? This person, he turns around, he says, I think I know who you are. He says, you are Ja'far ibn Muhammad. You're the grandson of the Prophet, aren't you? And the 6th Imam says, yes, I'm Ja'far ibn Muhammad. What about it though? He says, how dare you ask me what I have done? You question what I have done when you are the grandson of the Prophet. You are supposed to know what the Quran says, but you do not know what the Quran says. You do not have knowledge of the Quran, even though you're the grandson of the Prophet. And so the 6th Imam says, well, tell me, what is it from the Quran that I don't know? What is that missing link and puzzle piece in the middle of all of this that I'm not able to pick up on, right? He says, the Quran says that whoever does a good deed, that will count as 10 deeds. And whoever does a bad deed, it will only count as 1. من جاء بالحسنة فله عشر أمثالها ومن جاء بالسيئة فلا يجزى إلا مثلها. Right? You bring a good deed, it counts as 10. You bring a bad deed, it counts as 1. And then the funny thing is, he actually does the math in front of the Imam. He says, I took those 2 pomegranates, that's -2. I took those 2 loaves of bread, that's -2. And then I gave all 4 of them away So I am ending up with a net profit of plus 36. I am coming close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This mentality of mixing good deeds and bad deeds, which is what we do so often. So I'm coming close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Imam told him, he said, no, those 10, it only counts as 10 where you try to stay away from sinning, not when you do the sinning. Because the Quran says, إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only accepts from those who are fearful of Him, which means you're the type of person who at least tries his best to not do haram, right? You're the type of person who doesn't mix his good deeds with bad deeds. And then he brings his good deeds to the day of judgment. This person, his deeds, his reward is multiplied by 10, right? The hadith says, the sixth Imam says, this is the type of person who will have this type of reward. Not you, where you openly sin. And at the same time, what you do is what? You take that and then you give that as charity and you assume it's like a plus 10 and a 1, and you do this math with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So then this person, of course, the Imam, he moves on. He says, فَانْصَرَفَ وَتَرَكْتُهُ. He left and I left him. But in this hadith, you can see very well this mentality that we have when it comes to essentially playing math with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How does that reflect in our day-to-day lives, especially in this month of Ramadan? You will have the same thing. You will have brothers and sisters say, oh, if I do this Josh and Kabir, if I do the whole thing, then I will have this many hasanat, right? And in their mind, that means that on the side, in the mix of this, you can add in some haram deeds. But because this Josh and Kabir has so many hasanat, that at the end of the day, I will be fine. Is that true? Probably. You'll still probably make it into heaven. That's not the discussion. Will you build spirituality and faith with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The answer is no. Building faith and spirituality requires a life where I don't end up doing haram every 2 days or every week. That I at least work towards a lifestyle where I don't ruin my faith and I don't cut off my faith every 2 days or every week or whatever that, however often we commit a haram deed, for example. If someone can remove these haram deeds from their life, then even the little bit of good deeds that they do will count so much more. This is why on the nights of Qadr, it is less important for you to finish all the amal, and it is more important for you to actually build a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will stop you from doing haram the day after the nights of Qadr. If you really want to see if you benefited from the night of Qadr, let's see what happens the next day. The next day, a haram habit that you've had before, are you able to stay away from it? The next week, are you able to stay away from it? That's how you really gain from the month of Ramadan and the spirituality of the month of Ramadan. Otherwise, just going through Ramadan, just going through the nights of Qadr, that's the least thing we can do during Ramadan and during the nights of Qadr. I will end with this hadith, inshallah, from our beloved Imam. This is the sixth Imam, yes. The companion of his says, Kuntu inda Abi Abdullah. I was with the sixth Imam, and someone brought up the idea of the different acts of worship that they do. And when they brought up this idea, I was speaking of myself, and I said, you know what? I do very little. Ma ada'afa amali. How little do I do, right? Like the actions that I do, it's very little, the good deeds that I commit. The sixth Imam turned towards me, فَقَالَ مَهْ. He said, no, wait, astaghfirullah. He said, no, what you're saying is not correct, right? That's, your understanding is not correct. He said this, ثُمَّ قَالَ لِي إِنَّ قَلِيلَ الْعَمَلِ مَعَ التَّقْوَى خَيْرٌ مِّن كَثِيرِ الْعَمَلِ بِلَا تَقْوَى. He said, the little bit of good deeds that you do, that comes with taqwa, that comes with you staying away from haram. He said, this is better than the one who does a bunch of good deeds, but mixes his good deeds with haram. So the first one is better. So he says, the companion of the sixth Imam, he says, I asked, this is Mufaddal ibn Umar, famous companion of the sixth Imam. He says, I asked the sixth Imam, I said, how is that possible? What do you mean he does a bunch of good deeds, but he does haram on the side as well? That doesn't make sense. I mean, if this is a person who does a lot of good deeds, that naturally would mean his faith is growing a lot. That naturally would mean he wouldn't do all these sins, right? The Imam says, no, you will have a lot of people who will do a bunch of good deeds and then they will mix those good deeds with haram at the same time. He gives an example. He says, Na'am, mithlu rajul, like this guy, yut'imu ta'amahu, he will feed those who are hungry. وَيُرَفِّقُ جِيرَانَهُ, and he will be very kind and nice to his neighbors. وَيُوَطِّئُ رَحْلَهُ, and if someone is coming from outside of the city, he will host him. Now, these are not small deeds, right? These are huge deeds. These are deeds that have handsome rewards in Islam. But here's a caveat. Here's what ruins what this guy is doing, right? There's a plague that plagues what this person is doing. فَإِذَا ارْتَفَعَ لَهُ الْبَابُ مِنَ الْحَرَامِ دَخَلَ فِيهِ. When this person gets an opportunity to commit a haram deed, he actually ends up doing it. And because of that, he holds less value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compared to the one, as the Imam says, who doesn't do all of these great deeds. But at least at the fundamental level, when he comes across a haram deed, he is able to stay away from it. It says this one holds more value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So going through Ramadan and the nights of Qadr, inshallah, as I'm wrapping up, is less about doing a whole bunch of good deeds as it is about building a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and through that connection coming back and removing these haram habits that we have from our life. And if you think about it, each and every one of us has their own haram habits. For someone, it might be backbiting. For someone, it might be losing their cool and losing their temper. For someone, it might be the things that they look at. For some people, it might be the things they hear. For someone, it might be their dress code. For every person, of course, it is going to naturally going to be different in terms of what is that haram deed that they are mixing with their good deeds. Okay, and inshallah, I'll end. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as I'm bringing the talk to an end, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us, that gives us the tawfiq, inshallah, to be amongst those who can fully understand the purpose of our creation, number one, and number two, go about fulfilling it in the best of manners, inshallah. So we will see how we can benefit from this month of Ramadan as we end, inshallah. I'll pass it on, inshallah, to the moderator.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this third and final part of the Ramadan series hosted by the Thaqalain Muslim Association at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Rastani, for giving this enlightening and beautiful lecture, especially the story that you shared about the bread and pomegranates. I'm sure we'll need to do a lot less calculation from here on. We would like to just give a brief bio and about the Sheikh, just because we would like to honor him in that way, as we weren't able to do so at the start of the program due to some technical difficulties. And then afterwards, we'll move on to the Q&A portion, as we have some wonderful questions already asked. Sheikh Mehdi Rastani was born and raised in the US. After finishing high school, he joined the Islamic Seminary of Qom and completed 6 years of introductory and intermediate studies at the Shahidain Islamic Seminary. These 6 years were devoted to building and understanding of different Islamic sciences, namely Arabic syntax and grammar, sarf and nahu, logic, which is mantiq, Islamic theology, kalam, Islamic rulings and law, ahkam, Islamic history, jurisprudence, fiqh, and principles of jurisprudence, usul al-fiqh. Afterwards, he continued his studies for another 3 years under the supervision of many scholars, including Ayatollah Sayyid Hashimi Shahrudi. And during these 3 years, his studies were focused on grasping the works of the late Sheikh Murtada al-Ansari, namely Maqasid and Rasail, as well as delving deeper into Islamic philosophy by studying the well-known works of the great Allama Tabatabai, Bidayat al-Hikam and Nihayat al-Hikam. He then attended advanced classes on jurisprudence, Bahth al-Kharij, taught by His Eminence Ayatollah Hashimi Shahrudi. Sheikh Mehdi has made many trips throughout the US and Europe, lecturing on and teaching Islamic teachings based on the Shi'i school of thought in English, Farsi, and Arabic. He is currently assisting a Shia Islamic school, Wisdom Academy, and he is the resident alim of City of Knowledge Islamic Center in Dallas, Texas. So Jazakallah once again, Sheikh. We would like to proceed to the Q&A portion of the program. The Sheikh will be reading your questions and answering them as well.
Thank you very much, Brother Ali Basit. Inshallah, I'll start going through the questions and I'll be reading them out loud and inshallah mentioning what comes to my mind. So the first question was this. We hear Salatul Layl is a sign of the true Shia, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi has stressed this prayer to Imam Ali in his will. I try so hard, but I cannot wake up. Is it true that sins during the day prevent from Salatul Layl? The answer to that question is, of course, when we say that, Salatul Layl is a sign of a true Shia, that is not to say that if someone is not able to do this, they're not Shia. It doesn't mean even that their faith is not, fully complete without the Salat. At the end of the day, Salatul Layl is a mustahab Salat. Is it highly recommended? Absolutely, it is highly recommended. But for most of us, what we need to really be emphasizing on and really paying attention to are the sins that we commit. That is the number one issue. So as it relates to your question, is it possible that sins during the day prevent from Salatul Layl? Yes, that's absolutely possible. And if someone does have these sins, and this is exactly the point that we were trying to get across, that if someone does have these sins, that's where they need to start focusing first, right? Now, if someone wants to do Salatul Layl to help them with that, that's fine. But really the growth that someone is going to make, just to put it very simple and very clear, the growth that someone will make by removing one haram habit from their lifestyle is far greater than they will have by doing Salatul Layl. So I'll reiterate that because this approach is an approach that we may not be fully, familiar with. When you remove a haram habit from your life, the amount of spiritual growth that brings to you is going to be much, much more than doing certain mustahab a'mal, including Salatul Layl. And that is keeping in mind the greatness that Salatul Layl has. That is keeping in mind how much recommendation we have with regards to Salatul Layl. So you can do Salatul Layl on the side as well, yes, and that is definitely recommended, and it's definitely great, especially during this Ramadan that a lot of us are up during the nights anyways. But the important thing is that is not how you measure your spiritual growth necessarily. The spiritual growth is to be measured by the halal and haram that we have. The reason why I say that is because these halal and haram that we have are the fundamentals. When God says this is haram for me, that means what? That means that's the thing that matters the most for me, right? That's essentially what that means. And so if I'm disregarding the most important things, but then sending some gifts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the side, then what I'm doing doesn't really hold a lot of value, right? I remember growing up, I'll share this story with you guys. I remember growing up, and of course, some of the years of that I was in school, I was in Iran, right? So the students, a lot of them wouldn't do their homework, which was the most important thing for the teacher. But if the teacher needed a pen or a pencil, they would be the first ones to run and give this pencil, for example, to the teacher, right? And that logic doesn't make sense, because what would make the teacher 10 times happier would have been for you to just do your homework. I mean, he can always find a pen from somewhere, but it's whether you do your homework that matters the most. So we take the same approach, right? Where we emphasize things that are not as important as other things. Salatul Layl is wonderful. I'm reiterating this because I don't want anyone to walk away with the idea that Salatul Layl is not great. No. Quran says, تَتَجَافَ جُنُوبُهُمْ عَنِ الْمَضَاجِعِ, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has rewards for those who do Salatul Layl that no human being has ever imagined, mentioned in the verses of the Quran. But what we'll do even greater is to start working on those sins. So what I will say is, yes, try your best to do Salatul Layl, but your main focus, your number one focus should be on trying to remove those sins. Having said that, some tips to keep in mind is this, that if someone is not able to pray Salatul Layl because they know they won't be able to wake up, our Maraji have mentioned that you can do them before midnight. So if I know, like, I'm not going to be able to wake up, right? Then maybe, because I'm really tired, for example, then maybe I do them before midnight. This is allowed by our Maraji. They do allow this. And even if someone doesn't wake up, afterwards, what they can do is they can do qada of the Salatul Layl that they did. That is completely possible as well. So those are a couple points. So just because you didn't wake up doesn't mean you don't have to do it. No, you can do it afterwards, and it still has a great effect on a human being. Question number 2, the person who isn't concerned about building a relationship but wants to save themselves from hellfire, can they still calculate in a manner of 10 good rewards and 1 bad sin per each deed? The answer is yes, you can still do that. That logic still makes sense as long as I am not the type of person who will do bad deeds, just openly and without any restraints. Okay, because the Quran says, إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept the good deeds of those who are muttaqi, they are fearful. So if I have enough fear in my heart where, for the most part, I don't sin. Every now and then, maybe there's a shortcoming I have. Maybe shaitan gets the best of me. Then yes, this calculation, as far as I understand, would make sense. But I will say this before I move on to the next question. Your goal, from the perspective of spirituality, should never be, I'm just trying to get out of hellfire. Getting out of hellfire is a lot easier than we assume, okay? Essentially, whenever you do something haram, you repent sincerely, and that will get you out of hellfire if you think about it. So that, that would work, and you'll be good to go essentially. But that's we don't want to aim for that, is what I'm saying. We want to aim for something bigger and greater, and inshallah, you will get out of hellfire as well. All of us will, inshallah, right? But yes, that logic makes sense. That calculation makes sense. The only thing is that what you want to aim for? That's the point, right? Or is that what I want to aim for? Number 3, I started wearing hijab January before lockdown. Recently, I'm doubting it because all women in my life either don't wear it or show fringe for fashion. I am influenced to show fringe, feeling it wrong. Please advise. Okay, I'm influenced to show fringe. Okay, feeling that it is wrong is, I'm assuming, what the question is. I'll put this very simply, and I'm saying this outside of the context of hijab. So I know the question was with regards to hijab in particular, but outside of the context of hijab, any one of those, wajibat that we have, one of those obligatory actions that we have in our religion, where we see that people around us, they don't seem to be acting upon it, number one, and number two, it seems as though life is going on very well for them, right? It's always important to keep in mind, at the end of the day, we are born slaves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't get a choice. Okay, this is politically incorrect to say, right? When it comes to other human beings, yes, we are not born slaves. And that's why if you have a slave, when it comes to other human beings, that's something that we frown upon. That's why Islam got rid of that idea eventually, right? And in a very masterful and tactful manner, Islam was able to get rid of this whole issue of slavery. Okay, but when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are born slaves, whether you like it or you don't like it. Whether we know it or we don't know it, you already are his slave. Okay, so when it's like that, when he asks us to do something, then the idea, all right, sorry about that. The idea of us sitting there and saying, should I do this, should I not? All of this has to go out of the window, right? If it's obligatory, and if it is this God that I worship, which is the God that Ali ibn Abi Talib worships, that we cried for so much, 3-4 nights ago, right? Then when I hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something from me, then I just have to go ahead with it, right? Now, whether people around me, they don't do it or they do it, that's their problem, they have to deal with that. As it relates to myself, I have to stick to what I know I have to do, which is, if this is wajib and it's obligatory, then I have to go ahead with it. And this idea of fashion, I tell you, and I won't go into detail with regards to this, this is a serious issue that we have. It's a serious problem that we have. And unfortunately, living in the society that we live in and the times that we live in has not made it easier, has made it much, much more difficult. So that's just the reality of how things are. Of course, that's not just with hijab. A lot of other things are like this as well. And it's not just with the modesty of our sisters, it's the modesty of our brothers as well. And of course, the latter is a huge, huge problem as well. And I don't want to go into detail about that, but that's a huge problem. I say that because, well, let me leave it. I'll leave that topic for some other time, inshallah. But that is a huge problem that we have. Number 4, also on hijab, is it permissible for me, a sister, to post photos of myself with hijab on Instagram with large popular following? What I would say to that is, as long as it's based on the regulations that we have within Islam, right? If like Ayatollah Sistani, right? I quote this directly from Ayatollah Sistani, like directly from his website. He doesn't allow for makeup, for example, and he has one exception, and that doesn't apply to the makeup that the way it's done in the mainstream culture today. So if it's done with that, then no, it's not allowed, right? But if it's not done in that way and the hijab is proper and the way the picture is taken is a proper way, then yeah, that wouldn't be a problem. But of course, it's something that we have to be very careful with. That's why I was saying that social media has not made things any easier, not for our sisters and definitely not for our brothers. Moving on to the next question. You said you don't feel spiritual but have to act on it. But when you gain in spirituality, wouldn't you have a different feeling of yourself anyway? So how do we monitor what we've actually gained? Wonderful question. This shows me that you were really listening. What I was saying is that you don't define your spiritual growth based on a feeling, okay? So what that means is if you are taking the proper steps to grow from a spiritual perspective, maybe you feel super spiritual, maybe you don't feel that spiritual. That's not what matters, okay? So when you say you'll have a spiritual feeling at the end of the day, the answer to that point is maybe, probably sometimes, but that's not a measuring that you use. Because let me give you an example. Let's say I committed a sin a couple hours before Maghrib, na'udhu billah, right? The moment I go into an atmosphere that has a spiritual feeling to it, a spiritual touch to it, don't I feel more spiritual, right? Like if it's near Maghrib and then they're playing the adhan, right? And someone is reciting Rabbana, reciting it very well, right? And everyone is gathered around, the iftar table. And don't you have a spiritual feeling? Of course you have a spiritual feeling, but you just did something wrong a couple hours ago, right? So this is not, having a spiritual thing is not a bad thing. It's great. But my point is that's not your measuring stick, right? And further beyond that, the feelings that we have because we're at lower levels of faith can be influenced by a whole set and a whole host of factors. One of them is the type of things that we listen to, right? If I feel very, and then I put on some Quran, even though my actions have not changed at all, I will instantaneously feel a little bit more spiritual. But have I changed at all? No, I haven't changed at all. So that shows that our spirituality is based on actions. You say, what actions? The end of the question said, how do we monitor what we've actually gained? Here's how you monitor what you've actually gained on a 100% practical level. It doesn't get more practical than this. The way you essentially monitor your growth is you look at how much haram is happening in your life. If last year in Ramadan, there was 10 haram that was happening, now there's 5. Know for a fact that you are growing from a spiritual perspective. Whether you're reading Dua Kumal and you have this wonderful spiritual feeling or not, doesn't matter. You are growing from a spiritual perspective, okay? And if I see I'm doing more haram in my life compared to before, I am definitely not growing from a spiritual perspective. Even if I am listening to nasheed all day, or I'm listening to Quran all day, or I'm listening to Noha all day, right? Or to Masaib all day, or all that kind of stuff. Doesn't mean I'm really growing, right? Feelings will come and go, especially for you and me, whose faith is a little bit weaker. Yes, the special servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they had a feeling, that feeling was not influenced by the people around them. It wasn't influenced by worldly matters, right? When they had a feeling, it was very deeply rooted in truth. For me and you, no, we're influenced by anything and everything, right? So again, the type of things that we listen to can easily affect the type of feelings that you have. The recitation, and you guys can relate to this, the recitation that someone does of the Quran or of the dua, pay attention sometimes. If he does it in a good way, do you have a spiritual feeling? And then if he does it in a bad way, right? If he can't recite the dua properly, do you have a spiritual feeling just as much as you had before? 90% of the time, the answer is no. But isn't it the same dua? Isn't it the same recitation? So our feelings can be affected by so many different things. And that's why we don't want to go based off of that. We want to go based off of our actions. And the way to do that is keep track, muhasaba, keep track of our actions. Last Ramadan, God forbid, I broke 3 fasts. This year, I'm going to try not to break those 3 fasts. And if I can pull that off, then I have definitely growing from a spiritual perspective. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Moving on. Assalamu alaikum Maulana wa alaikum assalam. Do you have any tips to not commit the same old sins? Example is anger. Whenever I try to reform, I always mess up because of the same mistakes. How can I actually change and maintain consistency? Well, there's a lot of things that you would have to change, right? So really what you would have to do And this is why our scholars do this spiritual counseling, is because then you would have to sit down and see what is it exactly that's putting you in this situation to go ahead with this sin. Sometimes what you need to do is you need to change your environment way before it gets actually to that point. Sometimes it's a matter of mindset. Something is bothering you deep down. That's why what this person says makes you so angry. So this is going to be more of a case by case situation in terms of understanding what leads to that sin, right? I always say this. I say none of us are going to be like Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Okay, well, I won't say none of us. Well, most of us are not going to be like Yusuf alayhi salam, where we go all the way close to sin and then we turn away from it. 99% of us will not have that type of faith, right? So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from us sometimes is to then change the environment that we're in. If I have a habit, for example, of watching certain things that I'm not supposed to watch, then maybe I need to put myself in a situation where I'm not alone as much as I was before, for example, right? If I have a habit of, getting angry with people, then maybe I distance myself a little bit from people that I'm super sensitive towards, or from people that I get triggered by. These are just examples that I'm giving, of course. So that would be a case-by-case situation of how you go about it. Next question is, you said the final purpose of our creation is to reach perfection. That is to experience pleasure in heaven. So want to know what exactly will keep us busy in heaven, and I understand it's forever. Yes, it's forever. What will keep you busy is all the different blessings that you have in heaven. And really, it's a little difficult for us to understand this because anything that is unlimited is impossible for us as human beings to understand, at least as long as we're in this world, because it's difficult for us to picture something that doesn't end, okay? Whether it's God, whether it's our life, right? Whether it's the blessings in heaven, because everything that we have been dealing with so far ends so quickly. Like the money you have ends, the beauty you have ends. Everything that we have in this world, our life ends. So we haven't been acquainted with something that doesn't end. And that's why we can't really fully grasp it. So that's where this question is coming from. But what I would say is that it's not something to bother yourself about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how to keep us busy and how to keep us blessed. If you think about it, if you just have you have people in this world who will keep you busy for like forever. I mean, for those of you who have like a Netflix account, Netflix will keep people busy for years and years, right? Let alone Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he'll keep us busy with all the different blessings that he has. Next question, is it considered wajib to actually research and learn about religion? Absolutely. It is important and critical to learn. Now, whether it's wajib, the wajib part of it is at least when it comes to your fundamental belief system. Doesn't mean you have to go and do a degree in philosophy or anything like that. No, as long as you have some reasoning as to why is it that you believe in one God, and why is it that you believe the religion of Islam is the true religion. Yeah, you should know these things for yourself. But beyond that, living in the society that we live in, with all the pressure that we are receiving from every single corner, if you don't have a deep understanding of your religion, at the end of the day, it will come back to haunt you. And at the end of the day, there will be situations where people will put questions in front of you. And if you don't have answers for them, it will essentially, you will run the risk of ruining your faith because you don't have that knowledge that you need to have, right? So from that perspective, I don't want to say it's wajib, but I want to say it's very, very critical, right? And this is knowledge, unfortunately, that a lot of our children may have not had. Forgive me, not our children, but a lot of our parents may have not had. And because of that, we go through Sunday school, and the knowledge that Sunday school gives us is very, very limited. It's not even close to what we need, right? So then a person has to do the work on their own as they get older to educate themselves and to be able to understand the deeper meaning of their religion. And unfortunately, in our communities, what we are taught is that religion is this very basic thing, right? But by the way, everyone gives their opinion about it nowadays, and it's it's completely fine for everyone to speak on behalf of religion and on behalf of God at this point. Beyond that, what you find is that what we propagate to in our communities is that religion is just a matter of fasting and bowing down to God 5 times a day, which is a very, very superficial way of looking at your religion, right? There's so much more to Islam, right? And I wouldn't say this if I wasn't studying it for years. There's so much more to it. And unfortunately, in our communities, we have given this feeling that it's just some rituals. There are rituals that are part of Islam. They're very important, but it has to be coupled with that deep knowledge. And unfortunately, that's part of the problem that we have. I think we have an announcement before I continue.
Yeah, just a quick
questions.
announcement, if that's okay. We know we're going overtime, but because there's so many wonderful questions, we would like to take them up if the Sheikh is willing, and we will let the stream proceed. But if you need to leave, that's okay, because you can just view it later on the channel. So inshallah, the Q&A will proceed, but if you need to leave, take that into consideration.
Inshallah. Okay, so hopefully that answered that question about researching Islam and our religion. Next question is, some philosophy schools argue the purpose of life is to reach happiness. Can we say this is true also for Islam, as one may reach happiness via worship and perfecting deen? The answer is yes, absolutely. The only thing that Islam adds here is that we believe that happiness does not ever actualize in this world that we live in, because from the Islamic perspective, the human being is a creature that is always looking for unlimited pleasure and unlimited happiness, whereas the happiness you find in this world, by the nature of it being in this world, is always limited. And so because of that, essentially, no matter what you do, you will never fully be happy, right? And I always talk about this in our youth sessions. I say there's always a part of your life that is going to be missing. It's always a piece of this puzzle that's going to be missing. There's always going to be something where when you look at your life, you're like, you know what, if I just had this, if I just had that beauty, if I just had that fame, if I just had like these types of friends, then everything would be fine. Essentially, life is never going to be in this world 100% complete and perfect. There's always going to be this one missing piece to your life, and that is because we live in a world that is imperfect, right? We live in a world that's material, and anything that is material has limitations. And so, yes, we do believe that the purpose of life is to reach happiness. That's that pleasure I was talking about. So we completely agree with this. But the only thing to remember is that this will never really actualize in this world. It will actualize in the next world. If you've made mistakes in the past while praying and you didn't know that you prayed wrong, will you be forgiven if you ask for forgiveness, and will the prayer not count or still count? It depends on what mistake you made. If you skipped something that was known as a rukna, so for example, let's say I did a extra ruku, which is rare, right? Or if I, for example, was not doing the takbir properly, right? Then these are things that would create a problem for my salah. If my recitation was off a little bit, and now I realize, and now I fixed it, but I didn't realize it back then, those would be fine. If, for example, the dhikr I was saying in tashahhud was off a little bit, those are fine. None of those are dhikr, forgive me, none of those are rukna, and therefore accidentally, if you messed up on those, you don't have to worry about them. So it just depends on what it is exactly that you might have done wrong. Number 10, okay, well, we went through that. Is it true it's a recommended act to recite Ziyarat Ashura and gift it to Bibi Narjis? Please comment in general on the practice of gifting your a'mal of Quran or dua recitation to Ahlul Bayt. I don't know, I haven't heard in particular as it relates to gifting it to Lady Narjis, but as a whole, yes, it is a common practice and it is recommended to whatever you do to gift it to the Ahlul Bayt. That is completely understandable and it's completely recommended. This particular instance, I haven't heard of it in particular, but as a general concept, yes, that does exist. You just said Ayatul Sistani said no makeup at all, and one of your answers is Kohla, Kajal, perfume allowed in this category of makeup. What about skin color, foundation, or natural makeup look? So I won't go into the details because this is a very detailed and nuanced topic and it would require a whole new session. What I would say is that Ayatul Sistani says any type of makeup that does beautify someone and is considered an adornment for that individual, that is not allowed. Now, what does that actually apply to? You would have to have sisters would obviously have a better understanding of when that applies and when that doesn't apply. I don't mean to comment on the details so much. The only thing I will mention, just to clarify his ruling a little bit more, is that he has one specific exception, and that is a certain type of eyeliner. It's not the eyeliner that people use so often nowadays. It is an eyeliner that essentially goes between the eye and the eyelashes, and that's it. So it's visible. It's not very visible essentially. It's very different from the what we would call eyeliner. Okay, so that's the only exception that I have come across when it comes to makeup. The other ones you can refer to his website. As far as I've seen, everything else that essentially brings about a beautifying a person, he does not allow those. Perfume, of course, is outside of that category, so I'll touch on that real quick. Perfume, as long as it's very little and it doesn't attract attention, in the presence of the opposite gender, then that shouldn't be a problem. You want to, perfume the type that if someone, if it's a brother, then other brother who's hugging him or sitting right beside him, for example, that would be fine. But if it's the type of perfume that you find sometimes people walk by and then, 10 minutes later, you can still tell this person was there, that's not something that I believe our Maraja wants. How can one develop pleasure and strong certainty and satisfaction in his faith and worship? Sometimes I don't feel like anything is happening when asking for du'as. How does it work? If you want to develop pleasure in your worship, well, the way to do that is to consistently stay away from haram. Your faith will grow. When your faith grows, then when you speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first of all, you can concentrate a lot better. Number two, what will happen is that you will slowly take pleasure in speaking to him. Okay, that only happens when someone consistently stays away from haram. If someone's faith, like myself, is weak, and you do good deeds and then haram, and then good deeds and haram, which was the whole topic of today's discussion, that will never bring about this pleasure. Right? That pleasure has to come from a place of faith, and you only build that faith when you consistently stay away from haram. As it relates to dua in particular, no, that's just the shot of the thoughts of shaitan. The same one who gave you food today and gave you water today is telling you that when you pray to me, right? Go and tell them when they pray to me, I'm near to them and I'm close to them. If nothing happens, a lot of times it has other reasons, right? Maybe it's not the best thing for you. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove a bala from you instead. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want to give something to you in this world because he wants to give you something even greater in the next world, right? If you think about it, it's kind of ironic, or not ironic, but it's interesting that the person that we have the most du'as from, like the person who is known for his du'as amongst the Ahlul Bayt, right? Between Ali ibn Abi Talib and Imam al-Sajjad, right? Imam al-Sajjad was very well known for this. His whole sahifa is about this, right? Sahifa Sajjadiyya. So it's like dua after dua, and his duas are about all of these different topics, not even one topic in particular. But it's interesting that when you then look at his life, you find that from a worldly perspective, right? If like he wasn't a believer and he was just like a normal person, you would have looked at that life and you would have said, this is right. So that means that just because we do dua doesn't necessarily mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to jump into our life and say, okay, enough with this, right? Like she's going through a rough time or he's going through a rough time, no more difficulties for him or her, right? It's not going to happen like that. And like I said, with Imam al-Sajjad, he was praying day and night, right? And some of his du'as are about the things that he was going through. And still Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may have not removed those things from him because it was in his best interest to go through those things. So that's just the reality of it. I know that it's easier said than done. I know that if there's something that I'm asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for again and again and I don't get it, I know deep down it's going to be very difficult for me, but we just have to remind ourselves that this is the way he goes about things, right? That's why we read at the end of Joshan Kabir, Ya man la yubrimuhu ilhahul mulhin. Oh, the one who the insisting of others doesn't push you to do something if you don't want to do it. If he is wise and he knows that this is not in your best interest, doesn't matter how much we insist. He's not going to give it to us because it's not in our best interest sometimes. Last question that I have here. Can you explain why the Quran says it is permissible to marry those who have been given the book before you? However, Ayatollah Sistani says, based on precaution, yes, based on precaution, it is impermissible. Okay, so they are quoting verse 5 from Suratul Ma'idah. So I'm going to pull up the verse real quick so we can go over it together, right? Verse 5 is actually speaking of the concept, oh, forgive me. Here we go, verse 5. اليوم أحل لكم الطيبات وطعام الذين أوتوا الكتاب حل لكم وطعامكم حل لهم والمحصنات من المؤمنات والمحصنات من الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم إذا أتيتموهن أجورهن محسنين غير مصافحين ولا متخذي أخدان. From what I know, this seems to be, we seem to have hadith that this verse refers to the idea of the marriage of Ahlul Kitab when it comes to a temporary marriage and not a permanent marriage. So to give you a little bit of context, when we have verses of the Quran, sometimes hadith will take the verse of the Quran that might seem like a general statement and might mention that this is the ruling for this particular situation, okay? So for example, when it comes to Friday prayer, the Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu idha nudiya lis-salati min yawmil jum'ati fas'au. When they call you for Friday prayer, you have to run, right? And normally all of our maraja, when they look at a verse like that, they would say this is wajib. But the reason why they say it is not wajib right now is because we have hadith, multiple hadith, that say this is only wajib. This verse only applies when the imam is actually present. Okay, so hadith can take the scope of a verse and can limit it. Hadith cannot fundamentally negate a verse, right? Hadith can never come and say Friday prayer is never wajib. That is not allowed. Hadith cannot do that. But hadith can limit the scope of a verse. And this holds true whether you're Shia or you're Sunni, essentially. It doesn't really matter. And I don't have time to go into that right now, but whether you're Shia or you're Sunni, you go by this, right? Because the Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu aqimus salat, O you who believe, pray. But then we all know certain times of the year you may not be able to pray, whether you're Shia or you're Sunni, right? So this idea of hadith taking the verses of the Quran and limiting its scope, or explaining that this ruling that the Quran is mentioning applies to this particular situation, is something that you will find very commonly in the verses of the Quran. As far as I know, this is the situation with this ruling, with this verse of the Quran as well. Okay, and that is why the Sistani does allow that a person would engage with in temporary marriage with Ahlul Kitab. I thought that life's purpose was to gain ma'rifah of God and the Imam. If life's purpose is to instead perfect one's attributes, how do you fit gaining ma'rifah of God and the Imam into this? The answer is, the more you perfect your attributes, the more you get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Imams more. These are all intertwined with one another on a practical level, right? Because if you think about it, what makes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all of his wonderful attributes. And so hopefully this is the last question, because I need to wrap up. We have another session happening soon, inshallah. But with all the, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has all these beautiful attributes that he has. These attributes that he has is what makes him who he is, right? That's why we call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by all of his names. If you take more of your attributes and you internalize more of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside of you, because like you said, you are perfecting yourself, that naturally means you are coming closer to him and you're getting to know him even better. So even from a philosophical perspective, this makes sense, because every time that you take an attribute of yours and you grow it, right, then you take from that attribute of his and you internalize it. That means you're actually becoming like him. And that means you're getting to know him even better. Not the type of knowledge that you're reading in a book, the type of knowledge where your existence and his existence are actually coming closer to one another. So these are all intertwined with one another. When someone perfects this attributes of his, he is actually literally, from a philosophical perspective, coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the Imam of his time. The person who doesn't have these good attributes, he will never know his Imam. Even if he reads about his Imam on paper, that's not the knowledge that obviously we're referring to here, right? This ma'rifah is the type of ma'rifah that will manifest itself in one's attributes. So hopefully that answers that question. Thank you guys for the questions. These were they were really good questions, and I really enjoyed the questions. I would have loved to continue with the questions. We have this live session happening at 6, so I have to prepare for that, inshallah, and be there for that. But other than that, thank you very much for having me, and keep me in your du'as, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh Mehdi Rastani, for the beautiful lecture and even more beautiful Q&A. Thank you for all the attendees who are viewing this program and those who will be viewing in the future, inshallah. We just want to take a moment to thank the Sheikh for accepting our invitation for this live event. And inshallah, we can have more of him in the future. We would like to make use of the YouTube channel, so please don't forget to subscribe and follow the social medias for TMA UTSC. That is the name for all of the platforms, just TMA UTSC. Other than that, this was the final, the third and final session for the Ramadan series hosted by TMA UTSC. Inshallah, look out for future programs, and we'll see you then. Until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.